Right, Kelly. Well, first, from what I'm hearing and from what I know, having worked on Afghanistan, actually starting from our invasion when I was a senior Senate staffer and was overseeing our special operations forces and our effort there in Afghanistan for the committee, and then in the Obama administration, obviously helping with the U.S. European Command and beyond that. What we've known all along is that this wasn't going to be a victory. That ultimately the Taliban had a lot of leverage, political and military leverage. So it was always going to come down to some kind of deal with the Taliban. So the intelligence community wasn't completely off because they had been warning that there might be a collapse. And apparently, according to media reports, they said that the Taliban now, more recently, they were saying would take over the government. The issue was the speed. And I think the reason they couldn't quite, predict that was because political developments were changing on the ground and in Washington, right? I mean, basically, President Trump, when he left government, had this crazy deal where it was unilateral between the U.S. government and the Taliban, no real role for the Afghan government, the legitimate internationally recognized government, and the withdrawal date was May 1st. The Biden administration came in and said, okay, we need more time, let's push it out to August 31st. But they started rapidly decreasing without clearly having a plan for what would happen next in terms of all the Afghans, in terms of the collapse of the government, in terms of the political military will of the fighting forces in Afghanistan. And that's, I think, what we missed. We missed the fact that we needed more time and we needed to give the Afghans a sense that we were still going to be there for them in some fashion, because ultimately they lost confidence. Political military confidence for the non-Taliban Afghans melted away.
Yeah, and obviously, the Biden administration wants to say it's the Trump administration's fault and so on and so forth. But, I think their own words, Biden's are coming back to haunt him a little bit with the Vietnam references. Let me just ask you what happens now. So we are already seeing sort of political moves out of China that are saying they, I don't want to put it too strongly, but they are kind of open to the Taliban, looking for a new direction for Afghanistan. My point being, as we look at the map here, there are many analysts who say China's ultimate goal here is oil pipelines. They could run an oil pipeline through Afghanistan, all of a sudden be in the Gulf or be in some of the key Middle East oil-producing countries, that there's obviously great mineral wealth in Afghanistan, and that strategically it gives them more heft in the world, which they've been seeking. So how does this all end?
Well, I mean, China may like, an oil pipeline, but it's an incredibly unstable territory to run any kind of construction and pipeline through right now. And the Chinese government is also very much worried about insurgent activity coming back into China from the Uyghurs who are, who use force, who use terrorist tactics to get back at the Chinese government and to try to achieve some autonomy for the Uyghurs inside of China. So the Chinese government is worried about terrorism. All the neighbors should be worried about terrorism. Pakistan first and foremost. We should be worried, of course, because we always knew there was a risk that, the terrorist forces, whoever they were, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., would use Afghanistan again as a staging ground. And Pakistan is a very unstable country next door with its own form of Taliban. The border between Pakistan and Afghanistan is really basically for terrorists, open season. And unfortunately, Pakistan is also a nuclear power, 160 nuclear warheads there, as well as nuclear material. We, the United States, never like to see a situation where that might be at risk.
I mean, but the scenario you're painting is one where, the U.S. sort of presence in Afghanistan as a balancing factor becomes very important. And obviously, the administration's just voted with its feet and said, despite all the concerns that you're describing, they're gone.
Right. And I think that the problem is, look, again, the Taliban were going to prevail. We were going to have to leave. The question was how much stability could be negotiated at the end of the day in Afghanistan? How much room for human rights observance on the part of the Taliban might have been negotiated? We might have gotten more time to see what the Taliban would give the women. And I mean, of course, I'm not going to be Pollyannish about it. It probably wouldn't have been a good story. So ultimately, the women who were human rights activists and, activists for women's rights probably would have had to leave Afghanistan. But we could have given them a little more time and space to do it safely.
Yeah, absolutely. Evelyn, we really appreciate you joining us to talk about it this morning. Thank you. Evelyn Farkas.